Yahuwah, we pray. Open you our eyes, that we may behold wondrous things out of your Torah. Your word is a lamp unto our feet, and a light unto our path. For the commandment is a lamp, and the Torah is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life. Today's topic in this video, we will be discussing 7 witnesses proving Israel was not in Egypt 400 years. So commonly taught today in many churches and in seminaries that when Israel entered into Egypt, that they were in bondage for 400 years. So we're going to look at where does this belief come from. So we're going to look at Exodus chapter 12, Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12, as it is commonly translated in most of our English Bibles. We're going to read verses 40 and 41. Now the sojourning of the children of Yisrael, who dwelt in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass, at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the host of Yahuwah went out from the land of Egypt. As we can see, apparently, as it is presented in this translation, it seems that the children of Israel were in Egypt 430 years. So we're going to investigate and see if this is really the case. Now this passage, Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 and 41, is usually pointed out as the fulfillment of a prophecy given in Bereshit or Genesis to our father Abraham. So we're going to look at that passage. So Bereshit, or Genesis chapter 15, and we're going to read verses 13 to 16. And this passage is usually linked to Exodus chapter 12. So let's read. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So this prophecy spoken by Yahuwah to Abram about his seed being in a strange land 400 years is usually linked to Exodus chapter 12 being fulfilled in the 430 years in Egypt. So let's investigate this issue. Seven witnesses proving Israel was not in Egypt 400 years. Our first witness will be the Samaritan Pentateuch. Our second witness will be the Septuagint or LXX. Our third witness will be Shaul or Paul. Our fourth witness will be the Book of Jubilees. Our fifth witness will be the historian Flavius Josephus. Our sixth witness will be the Book of Jasher. And finally, our seventh witness will be the lineage of Masha or Moses. Devarim or Deuteronomy chapter 19 verse 15. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity, or for any sin, in any sin that he sins. At the mouth of two witnesses, or at the mouth of three witnesses, shall the matter be established. This is the law of witnesses. So in this lesson, not only will we be presented with three witnesses, but in fact, we will be presented with 7 witnesses. Now we're going to talk about source texts. Commonly in most of our English translations of the Bible, for example, the King James Version, they're translated heavily from the Textus Receptus, which is based on the Masoretic text of Hebrew. So the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, translated into English in most of our Bibles, the translation was based on the Hebrew Masoretic text. So the oldest extant manuscripts date from around 800 AD. However, there are older manuscripts of the Tanakh. We have the Samaritan Pentateuch, which dates about 122 BC. And we have the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Tanakh, which was translated from Hebrew to Greek by Hebrew scholars. And this text was completed between 250 and 132 BC. So when we compare the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint to the Masoretic text, the Samaritan Pentateuch and Septuagint predate the Masoretic text by about 1,000 years. Again, we'll look at Shemot, or Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 and 41, according to the English translation of the Masoretic text. Now the sojourning of the children of Yasharel, who dwelt in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the hosts of Yahuwah went out of the land of Egypt. Here, it would seem, according to the Masoretic text, that Egypt, or Israel, was in Egypt for 430 years. Now we're going to compare the Masoretic text to earlier texts of the Tanakh and see what we find. Our first witness, the Samaritan Pentateuch. And as we discussed earlier, the Samaritan Pentateuch predates the Masoretic text. We're going to look at the same passage in Shemot or Exodus chapter 12 and see how it reads translated from the Samaritan Pentateuch. Now the sojourning of the children of Yisrael and fathers of them, who dwelt in Canaan and in Egypt, was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of Yahuwah went out from the land of Egypt. As we can see here, according to the Samaritan Pentateuch, which is an earlier text, the 430 years comprises the time of the children of Israel in Canaan and in Egypt. So this is different than what we find in the translation from the Masoretic text. So which translation is correct? So let's look at some other sources. Second witness is the Septuagint. And again, the Septuagint is an earlier text, a text in Greek that predates the Masoretic text. Again, we're going to look at Shemot or Exodus chapter 12, and we're going to read the translation from the Septuagint. In the sojourning of the children of Yisrael, while they sojourned in the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan, was 430 years. And it came to pass, after the 430 years, all the forces of Yahuwah came out of the land of Egypt by night. Here again, we see that according to the Septuagint, the 430 years is a combination of the time spent in Canaan and in Egypt. So the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch agree on this issue. Our third witness will be Shaul or Paul. Paul was a contemporary of Yahushua HaMashiach and his Talmudim or his disciples. Paul was an expert in the Torah. He was a Pharisee. So now we're going to look at one of the letters written by Paul. In Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, we're going to read verses 16 and 17. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He says not and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, which is Mashiach. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before Elohim in Mashiach, the law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul, that it should make the promise of none effect. So we see here that according to Paul, the promise of was made to Abraham, and 430 years after the promise was made to Abraham, the law was given. When was the law given? The law was given at Mount Sinai after Israel came out of Egypt. So according to Paul's understanding, the 430 years was the time span between the promise given to Abraham and the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. So Paul is agreeing with the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint that the 430 years comprise the years spent in Canaan and in Egypt. Our fourth witness is the Book of Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees is one of the texts used by the Essenes, found in the Qumran community in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Book of Jubilees, chapter 37. And in this month, Abraham moved from Hebron and departed and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur in the mountains of Gerar. And in the middle of the 5th month, he moved from thence and dwelt at the well of the oath. In the middle of the 6th month, Yahuwah visited Sarah and did unto her as he had spoken, and she conceived. The Book of Jubilees counts the years from the time of creation, Adam in the garden, forward. So according to the Book of Jubilees, this account happened in the year 1980. So that's 1980 years from the time of Adam in the garden. Okay, the Book of Jubilees, chapter 87. And after this law I made known to you the days of the Sabbaths in the desert of Sinai, which is between Elim and Sinai. And I told you of the Sabbaths of the land on Mount Sinai. And I told you of the Jubilee years in the Sabbaths of years. But the year thereof have I not told you till you enter the land which you are to possess. And the land also will keep its Sabbaths while they dwell upon it, and they will know the Jubilee year. Wherefore I have ordained for you the year weeks, and the years, and the Jubilees. There are 49 Jubilees from the days of Adam until this day, and 1 week. So this passage is talking about the giving of the covenant or the law at Mount Sinai. And it's recorded to be given in the year 2410. Okay, so we see Abraham in Hebron in the year 1980, and we see the covenant or the law being given at Mount Sinai in the year 2410. So let's do the math. according to the book of Jubilees, Abraham moved from Hebron in the year 1980, and the law was given at Sinai in the year 2410. So if we take 2410 and subtract 1980, it gives us 430 years. So again, according to the book of Jubilees, the 430 years is the land comprised from Abraham in Canaan to Israel coming out of Egypt. Our fifth witness will be the historian Flavius Josephus. According to his History, Antiquity of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 15, we read, "They left Egypt in the month Xanthicus, on the 15th day of the lunar month, 430 years after our forefather Abraham came into Canaan, but 215 years only after Jacob removed into Egypt. It was the 80th year of the age of Moses, and of that of Aaron 3 more. They also carried out the bones of Joseph with them, as he had charged his sons to do." As we have read, according to Flavius Josephus, the 430 years that count began when Abraham came into Canaan and ended when Israel left Egypt. That's the 430 years. And he goes further to say that Israel was only in Egypt 215 years. So Flavius Josephus was a first century resident of Judea. So if we go by the beliefs of the first century Yahudim, or the first century Jews, like Shaul and Flavius Josephus, both of them believed that the 430 years was a time in Canaan and in Egypt. Both of them did not connect the 430 years to the 400-year prophecy in Genesis chapter 15. Our sixth witness will be the book of Jasher. In the book of Jasher, chapter 81, we read, "And the sojourning of the children of Yasharel, who dwelt in the land of Egypt in hard labor, was 210 years. And at the end of 210 years, Yahuwah brought forth the children of Yasharel from Egypt with a strong hand." Again, here we see in the book of Jasher that the children of Yasharel dwelt in Egypt 210 years. All right, let's recap. The Samaritan Pentateuch, Septuagint, Shaul, the Book of Jubilees, and Flavius Josephus testify that the 430-year period spanned from the time Abraham entered Canaan to the time the Israelites left Egypt. Flavius Josephus wrote that the Israelites were in Egypt only 215 years. It is recorded in the book of Jasher that the Israelites were in Egypt 210 years. So let's do the math. We're going to take the 430 years from Exodus chapter 12 and subtract 215 years according to Flavius Josephus. So 430 years minus 215 years equals 215 years. So that gives us 215 years sojourning in Canaan and 215 years sojourning in Egypt. "215 years in Canaan plus 215 years in Egypt gives us the 430 years. And in fact, when we look at the time that Abraham spent in Canaan, we count the years from Abraham in Canaan to Jacob leaving Canaan and entering Egypt. When we look at the history, we come up with 215 years in Canaan. Our final witness will be the lineage of Masha or Moses. Bamidbar or Numbers chapter 26, verses 58 and 59. These are the families of the Levites, the family of the Libnites, the family of the Hebronites, the family of the Malites, the family of the Mushites, the family of the Korathites. And Kohath begat Amram. And the name of Amram's wife was Jochebed, the daughter of Levi, whom her mother bare to Levi in Egypt. And she bare unto Amram Aaron and Moses, and Miriam their sister. So we see Kohath, Amram, Moses. All right, Kohath was the father of Amram. Amram was the father of Moses. First Chronicles chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, and Hebron, and Uzziel. And the children of Amram, Aaron, and Moses, and Miriam. The sons also of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. So again, we see Kohath, Amram, and Moses. Bereshit or Genesis chapter 46, verse 8. And these are the names of the children of Yisrael which came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. So in Genesis chapter 46, it's going to give us a list of names of the descendants of Israel that entered into Egypt. In other words, these are Israelites that were alive before Israel entered into Egypt. And when we go to verse 11, the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. This means that Kohath was alive before the Israelites entered into Egypt. So remember this fact as we go on. Shemot, or Exodus chapter 6, verse 18. And the sons of Kohath, Amram, and Izhar in Hebron, and Uzziel. And the years of the life of Kohath were 133 years. So according to this record, Kohath lived to be 133 years old. Shemot chapter 6, Exodus chapter 6, verse 20. And Amram took him Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses. And the years of the life of Amram were 137 years. Here we see that Amram lived to be 137 years old. Devarim, or Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verse 7. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. Here we see that Moses lived to be 120 years old. So let's do the math. We have Kohath, Amram, and Moses. And as we saw according to the record, Kohath was alive before the Israelites entered into Egypt. So let's look at this time frame, and we're going to stretch their ages to the extreme. We're going to stretch their lifespans end to end and see what this gives us according to years. So Kohath lived 133 years. Amram lived 137 years. And Moses lived 120 years. So for the sake of argument, let's say that Kohath was born one day before the Israelites entered into Egypt, so that the total of his 133 years was spent inside Egypt. And let's just say that Amram was conceived the same day that Kohath died. So we're going to put their years end to end. And again, let's just say that Moses was conceived the same day that Amram died. So we're going to take the years of their lives with no overlapping. We're going to put them end to end and see the time frame that it gives us. So 133 years plus 137 years plus 120 years equals 390 years. So even if we stretch the years of their lives end to end, 390 years is still less than 430 years. And these ages of Kohath, Amram, and Moses are given in the Masoretic text. So the Masoretic text actually contradicts itself when it says that Israel dwelt in Egypt 430 years. Because when we look at the years of these three men, even when we stretch them end to end, it's still less than 430 years. "430 years minus 390 years gives us an error of 40 years. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing again, knowing that Moses was 80 years old when Yisrael left Egypt. When the Israelites left Egypt, Moses was 80 years old. So let's do it again. 133 years plus 137 years plus 80 years gives us 350 years. So again, 350 years is less than 430 years. When we take 430 years and subtract 350 years, that's an 80-year difference. The verdict. We see that the understanding that is commonly taught that the Israelites spending 400 years in Egypt, according to the Masoretic text, which says Israel was in Egypt 430 years, is incorrect. In fact, when we look at the Masoretic text and look at the years of the lives of Kohath, Amram, and Moses, the Masoretic text actually contradicts itself. We see that the Samaritan Pentateuch and the Septuagint agree that the 430-year period was the period of time spent in Canaan and in Egypt, which also agrees with our other witnesses. The 430 years of Exodus chapter 12, verses 40 and 41 is the time period covering the years of Abraham in Canaan to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. So what about the 400-year prophecy? Because when we look at the beliefs of Shaul or Paul, we look at the history of Flavius Josephus, we look at the literature used by the Essenes, the first century Israelites, the first century Yahudim, the first century Jews, did not link the 430 years in Exodus chapter 12 to the 400-year prophecy in Genesis chapter 15. In fact, they understood that the 430 years was a time span spent in Canaan and in Egypt. And they agree that the time Israel spent in Egypt was about 215 years. So now we're going to look at this passage from Bereshit or Genesis chapter 15 that is usually linked to Exodus chapter 12, whereas Exodus chapter 12 is usually presented as a fulfillment of this prophecy here in Genesis chapter 15. Let's read it again, verses 13 to 16. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. But in the fourth generation they shall come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So this passage is usually read in a way that verses 13 to 16 is all one subject, one period of time. However, when we consider the writings of the first century Hebrews, they did not see this 400-year prophecy connected to the time of the Israelites in Egypt. So what is a better way of reading this passage? Now let's look at it again. And he said unto Abram, Know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. So my suggestion is that verses 13 and 14, that's the first subject. Verse 15, And you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. So now the subject has changed. The subject of the discussion has shifted. Now Yahuwah is talking about something else. So verse 15 is talking about something different than verses 13 and 14. But in the fourth generation they shall come here again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So Yahuwah, in his discussion with our father Abram, here is changing the subject again. He's talking about something different than what he spoke in verse 15. In verse 16, he's talking about that his children will come here again in the fourth generation. So here we see that in this discussion with Abram, Yahuwah is giving him a play-by-play, but he's discussing different issues in this passage. In verses 13 and 14, he lets Abram know that his children or his descendants will be strangers in the land, not theirs, and afflicted 400 years. Then in verse 15, he lets Abram know that he's going to die at a good old age. That's a different subject. And then finally in verse 16, Yahuwah tells Father Abram that his descendants will come back to this land in the fourth generation. And then again, this is a different subject than the verse that preceded it. So in this passage, there are three different issues that Yahuwah discusses with Abram. So then that begs the question, when is the fulfillment of the 400 years prophesied in Bereshit or Genesis chapter 15? Because when we look at the writings and beliefs of the first century Hebrews, they did not connect the 430 years in Exodus chapter 12 to being a fulfillment of the 400 years in Genesis chapter 15. So this is something for you to consider. What is the fulfillment of the 400-year prophecy of Genesis chapter 15? And that concludes our lesson, 7 witnesses proving that Israel was not in Egypt 400 years.
Shema Yisrael. You are the light of the world. Let the love of Yahuwah and light of Torah shine in your hearts. May the face of Yahuwah shine on you. Shalom.